The alarm goes off. You know what you need to do. You have done it 100 times. But for 1 second, before you move, you ask a question you don't want to ask. Why? Not why today. Why any of it? You get up anyway. You do the work. You show up. And at the end of the day, if you're honest, there's something underneath everything. Not pain, not sadness, something quieter than both. Like you have been running towards something, you finally arrived, and there was nothing waiting. Sunday afternoon, everything is fine, nothing is wrong, and you feel absolutely nothing. I have sat in that exact silence too. Here's something worth knowing about that silence. Your brain was not built to enjoy having things. It was built to want them. The moment you reach the goal, something drops. Almost immediately, the next thing starts forming. Schopenhauer called it pendulum. Desire on one side, emptiness on the other. The brief moment of having, so short we barely feel it, before the wanting begins again. He wasn't being cruel, he was being precise. But here is what I need you to hear. This feeling is not new. A king sat down and wrote this. I built houses, I planted vineyards, I gathered silver and gold. I had everything a man could want. Then he paused and wrote one more line. It was all breath, a chasing after wind. The word he used, hevel, means vapor, something you try to hold and it passes through your fingers. 3,000 years ago, a king, feeling exactly this. 500 years ago, in the silence of a monastery, monks experienced something they couldn't name. They had prayed, they had worked, they had given everything to meaning. And still, in the long hours of the afternoon, a hollowness came. Not sadness, not laziness, the sense that the hours were passing through a life that should have felt full. They called it Acadia, the noonday demon, men who had stripped their lives to the essential still, visited by its absence. So maybe the problem was never what you had. Pascal wrote it differently. All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. Not because sitting is hard, because when we stop, we see the space, and the space is unbearable. So we move, we plan, we chase, we feel. Not only because we want things, but because movement feels like meaning, until we stop and find out it wasn't. In 1882, a man sat alone at a desk. The world had given him everything it knew how to give. He had written the books, received the fame, built the life, and that night he opened his journal, not to create something, but because he didn't know what else to do with what was happening inside him. He wrote, I began looking for a rope in my house. I was afraid of what I would do with it. This was Tolstoy. What terrified him wasn't the darkness. It was the question underneath it. The one he had run from for 50 years, finally refusing to be quiet. What is this for? Not dramatic, not poetic, just a man at desk who could no longer pretend the answer was somewhere in the next achievement. Alexander stood in Babylon after the last city fell, nothing left to conquer, and historians write that he wept, not from grief, from arrival. The silence on the other side of everything he had wanted was louder than any battlefield he had ever stood on. You don't have to have conquered the world to know that silence. The promotion came through. You sat in your car. 20 minutes passed. You felt nothing. You drove home. You didn't tell anyone. Because how do you explain that the thing you worked 3 years for left you emptier than before you had it? This is where Kierkegaard said something I haven't been able to get off. He called it despair, not the way we use the word. The most dangerous despair, he said, is the despair that doesn't know its own name, moving, achievement, performing, while something quite underneath keeps signaling. This is not it. And here is what he believed. That signal is not a malfunction, it is an invitation. The emptiness is not telling you that you are broken, it is telling you that something has not yet been found. Frankl watched people collapse on Sundays. The ones who had run all week stopped for one day and fell apart. He called it the existential vacuum, the silence where meaning should be. And he said, this is not a sickness. This is what happens when a human being is asked to live without knowing why. Meaning, he said, grows in 3 places: in what you make, in who you love, and how you face what you cannot change. Not one of these requires arrival. All of them happen in the middle of living. Now, here is what I find worth holding. Some of these people didn't stay in the dark. Tolstoy walked out and watched the people working on his land. Simple lives, no fame, no achievement, and something shifted. Not because they had answers, but because they weren't isolated in the question. They were connected to each other, to their work, to something that moved beyond them. He didn't find meaning in more achievement. He found it in contact. Camus looked at Sisyphus, condemned to push a stone to the top of a hill, watched it fall, and pushed it again, forever. And Camus said, we must imagine Sisyphus happy. Not because the boulder stops falling, but because meaning isn't waiting at the top. It lives in the continuing, in the pushing itself. And Epicurus, so long misread, wasn't talking about more. He was talking about enough, a good meal, a real conversation, the light in the morning. The one thing was never the point. The being here was. I don't know which of these roads is yours. Maybe it's connection, maybe it's continuing when everything says stop. Maybe it's making something and caring about the making, not the result. Maybe it's learning to want less and finding that less is strangely full. I don't know, but something shifts just in asking the question seriously. The question didn't change, but the weight of it did. The alarm will go off again tomorrow, and maybe you will ask again, why? But this time, maybe it feels less like a wound and more like a compass. Every person who ever found their way through started exactly where you are right now, asking, not yet knowing, but looking.